A young girl set off in 1986, rollerblading through her neighborhood on what seemed like an ordinary summer day. She told her parents she was heading to a friend's house, but she never made it there. When the friend called to ask if she was still coming over, her parents realized something was wrong. But by then, she was already gone, vanished, without a single clue. 2 decades passed. Then one weekend, her parents visited a quiet town in Oregon. It was supposed to be a simple getaway, a chance to breathe. The streets of Fern Creek were lined with towering trees, their leaves glowing in the afternoon sun. Market stalls buzzed with weekend chatter, handcrafted pottery, baskets of fresh berries, and the scent of warm bread filled the air. But Robert Whitmore wasn't in the mood to enjoy any of it. He followed a few paces behind his wife, Helen, his thoughts far from the present. "I don't see why we had to come all this way," he muttered, his voice low but firm. Helen, standing by a table of delicate ceramics, let out a quiet sigh. "We've talked about this. It's been years. We needed this. Just try, for once, to enjoy something." It had taken her months, no years, to convince him to leave Illinois, even for a few days. Ever since their daughter Emily disappeared at age 12, their home had become a place of silence and shadows. Every room whispered her name. Every wall echoed the question no one could answer. What happened? Robert never stopped looking, never stopped asking. But over time, the weight of not knowing had built a shell around him. Joy felt like betrayal. Smiles didn't come easy, and even small pleasures were avoided, as if they were somehow wrong. Helen, though, had started to shift. She still carried the grief, but she refused to let it bury her. She knew Emily wouldn't want that. This trip wasn't just a vacation. It was her quiet attempt to bring Robert back, if only a little, to the world outside the pain. As they walked down the quiet street, Robert's eyes landed on something across the road. An old shop, paint peeling, windows cluttered with relics from other lives. The gold lettering above the door read, "Timber Treasures." Porcelain dolls, faded books, rusty tools. It was the kind of store Helen would love. She lit up. "That looks fun. Come on, just for a minute." "You go," he replied flatly. "I'll wait out here." He leaned against a lamppost and reached for a cigarette. Just a moment of calm. Or so he thought. Then his eyes drifted to the window display and froze. Amidst the dusty clutter, behind an old mannequin and jars with faded labels, sat a pair of rollerblades, pink and blue, worn, small, too small for any adult. He stared, unblinking. Time stopped. His hand, still holding the unlit cigarette, dropped slowly to his side. Those rollerblades. They looked exactly like Emily's. The color hit him first. That unmistakable shade of bubblegum pink on the boots, the bright turquoise wheels and frame, and the thick purple straps. A sudden wave of dizziness passed through Robert. He knew those rollerblades. Not just the style, on those exact ones. He had given them to Emily on her 12th birthday. He could still see her beaming as she slid them on for the first time, wobbly but thrilled, turning the sidewalk into her personal runway of laughter and light. His cigarette and lighter fell back into his pocket, forgotten. Without thinking, he rushed across the street and yanked open the shop's door. The bell above it rang sharply as he stormed inside, his eyes scanning the dim interior. Behind the counter stood a man with thinning hair and the look of someone who'd spent too many years surrounded by forgotten things. Helen turned around from the back of the store, startled. "Robert, what's wrong?" But he didn't answer her. His focus was locked on the man behind the counter. "The rollerblades," Robert said, voice tight. "In the window. I need to see them." The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow but moved toward the display. Helen followed quickly, concern deepening in her voice. "Robert, what is going on?" "Just look," he whispered. The man placed the rollerblades on the counter. Helen gasped, covering her mouth with one hand. They looked just like Emily's. Robert's hands shook as he picked one up, turning it over slowly. Size 4, that's what I bought her. Helen gently touched his arm. Robert, please don't do this. It could just be a coincidence. There must be thousands of pairs like these. But he was already checking the underside of the blade. There, etched faintly into the plastic of the toe guard, were the initials, EGW. Emily Grace Whitmore, he whispered. I carved them myself. These are hers. Helen's doubt vanished. She reached out, tracing the letters with her fingertip, her hand trembling. How? How did these end up here? We're over 2,000 miles from home. The shopkeeper, who'd been listening quietly, cleared his throat. Is there a problem? Robert looked up, his gaze fierce. These belong to our daughter. She vanished 20 years ago. She was wearing these when she left home. Where did you get them? The man's demeanor changed instantly. He reached for the rollerblades. I'm sorry, but these aren't yours. If you want them, you'll have to pay what's listed. You can't be serious, Robert said, stunned. These are evidence. Our daughter was taken while wearing them. I don't know anything about that, the man replied flatly. They're part of my shop's inventory. Price is $45. 45? Robert said, incredulous. I paid less for them new back then. Vintage gear's popular now. Prices go up. Helen gently tugged his sleeve. Maybe we should just buy them. It's not about the money, Robert. But he shook his head. No, these are ours, like our daughter. They were taken from us. I won't pay for what already belongs to us. The shopkeeper's face darkened. Then I'm going to have to ask you both to leave. When Robert stood his ground, clutching the rollerblades tightly, the man stepped from behind the counter and tried to push them toward the door. A scuffle broke out, just enough to draw the attention of people passing by and a uniformed officer patrolling the street. The officer entered calmly but alert. Is there a problem? This man is trying to steal merchandise from my shop, the shopkeeper declared. I'm not stealing anything, Robert snapped. These are my daughter's rollerblades. She disappeared in Illinois 20 years ago. She was wearing them that day. The officer's expression shifted to cautious skepticism. Sir, if you believe this is your property, there are legal steps to take, but you can't just walk out with it. Look, Robert said urgently, flipping the blade. Her initials, EGW, Emily Grace Whitmore. I engraved those myself. And there's a serial number. I kept the receipt. I never got rid of it. The officer took a closer look. Something in his stance changed. He stepped back and spoke into his radio, requesting information about a cold case from Illinois. After a brief exchange, he turned to Robert, his tone now entirely different. Mr. Whitmore, I'm sorry for what you've been through. There is, in fact, an active case matching your story. Then he looked at the shopkeeper. I'm going to need the owner's information. The man stiffened. I'm just the employee. The owner's not here today. Then give me a name. Reluctantly, the man pulled a business card from under the counter. Victor Manson. He's not going to be happy. The officer pocketed the card. These rollerblades are now evidence. I'll be taking them. He turned to Robert and Helen. I'd like both of you to come with me and make an official statement at the station. As they stepped out into the afternoon light, Robert held the rollerblades close, not just to his chest, but to his heart. For the first time in 2 decades, hope flickered. Maybe, just maybe. This was the beginning of something they'd long thought impossible. Maybe this was the moment they'd been waiting for. A sign, at last, that Emily's trail hadn't completely vanished. Robert and Helen followed the officer, whose name badge read Brennan, as he led them to his patrol car parked along the edge of the market. You can drive behind me, he said gently. The station's just about 10 minutes down Main Street. The Fern Creek Police Station was a modest brick building with an American flag waving softly out front. Inside, the air was calm and professional, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions building inside Robert. Officer Brennan led them into a quiet interview room, 4 chairs, a plain table, and, sitting in the middle of it, the rollerblades sealed in a clear evidence bag. Somehow, seeing them like that made them even more real. "I've contacted the detective on call," Brennan explained. "He'll want to hear everything. In the meantime, I need to confirm some details." He took out a notepad. "Can you describe your daughter as she was back then?" Robert cleared his throat. "She was 12, shoulder-length auburn hair, green eyes, tall for her age, about 5'2". She had a small scar on her right arm from a fall when she was 7. Officer Brennan nodded as he jotted everything down. "And the date of the disappearance?" "June 15th, 1986, Helen replied, her voice steady, though her eyes shimmered. "It was a Sunday, around 3 in the afternoon. She was headed to her friend Samantha's place, just half a mile away. She wanted to show off her birthday present. But she never got there," Robert continued. "We didn't know something was wrong until Samantha's mom called, a little after 5. Just then, the door opened, and a man stepped inside. Mid-40s, salt and pepper hair, serious demeanor. "I'm Detective Marshall," he introduced, shaking their hands. "I hear you may have found something connected to your daughter's case." Robert gestured toward the evidence bag. "Those are her rollerblades, no doubt." Marshall sat across from them. "I've already contacted the Illinois authorities. They're sending over your case files. Might take a few hours. For now, I'd like to hear everything from the beginning." Over the next hour, Robert and Helen poured out the story. The day Emily left, the frantic calls, the endless search parties, the late nights spent stapling flyers to telephone poles, the tip line they set up, the investigators they hired when the case went cold. "We never gave up," Robert said, his voice heavy. "I even left work for a year. We chased every call, every rumor, but nothing ever led anywhere." Detective Marshall nodded slowly. "And now, after all this time, those blades show up in a small-town shop across the country. It's unusual, to say the least." "Can we find out how they got there?" Helen asked. The employee didn't offer much help. "We're working on that," Marshall replied. "I've sent someone to look into the shop's owner, Victor Manson. We'll also check inventory records when the shop reopens." He carefully unsealed the bag and examined the rollerblades with gloved hands. "We'll get them photographed and logged. Might even check for fingerprints or fibers, though after 2 decades, well, we'll try." Just then, another officer entered with a folder in hand. Marshall flipped through it and frowned slightly. "Victor Manson bought Timber Treasures 18 years ago," he said. "Before that, he moved around quite a bit. No criminal record, but not much of a paper trail either." He held up a DMV photo, a stern-faced man in his 50s with thinning hair. "Do you recognize him?" he asked. Robert and Helen both shook their heads. "According to his employee, he'll be back in town in 2 days, Marshall said. "We'll bring him in for questioning then." By the time they finished, the sun had dipped low outside the station windows. Detective Marshall walked them out. "We'll pursue every lead this opens," he assured them. "An officer will visit the shop again tomorrow to check for anything else that might connect to your daughter. But for tonight, please, try to rest." The evening air was cool and quiet. Robert held onto that evidence bag in his mind as tightly as if he were still physically carrying it. It was real. It was hers. And that made everything feel possible again. But it also terrified him, because if the rollerblades had survived, then maybe someone else had too. As the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Robert and Helen headed back toward the market, though most of it had been packed up for the night. Stalls were folded, lights dimmed. The last few diners lingered in warmly lit cafes. Helen touched his arm. "Let's go back to the Airbnb. The police are handling it now." But Robert shook his head. "I need to see it again. That shop, What if there's more in there? Something we missed? She sighed, but followed. She knew that look in his eyes. And deep down, maybe she needed to see it again too. They moved quietly through the dimming streets toward Timber Treasures, toward the place where the past had suddenly come back to life. Just as they neared the shop again, they spotted the same employee from earlier, now locking the front door. When he saw them, his body tensed, and his movements became noticeably rushed. "Look," Helen whispered, nodding toward the alley. "Someone's coming out the side door." Robert turned. He hadn't noticed that entrance before. A man stepped out into the fading light, dressed in a leather jacket and a cowboy hat pulled low. Even from a distance, there was something oddly familiar about him. Robert narrowed his eyes. "He looks like the guy in that photo, the one the detective showed us, Victor Manson. But the officer said Manson wouldn't be back for 2 more days," Helen replied. "Why would the shopkeeper lie about that?" They watched in silence as the man crossed the street toward a black sedan parked near a closed toy store. Another man was already standing beside it, and next to him, a young girl, no older than 9, her blonde hair tied in neat pigtails. The man in the cowboy hat knelt beside the girl. He reached out to embrace her, but she turned her face away. When he tried to ruffle her hair, she flinched. "Something's wrong," Robert muttered. That subtle recoil, that wasn't just moodiness, that was fear. "Maybe," Helen said gently, "but we can't know for sure. Kids act up sometimes, especially when they're upset." Robert nodded, but his gut wouldn't quiet. The whole scene felt off, like they were witnessing something hidden just beneath the surface, a tension that didn't belong. The 3 got into the car and drove off. Robert's attention snapped back to the shopkeeper, who was now walking quickly in the direction of a nearby bus stop. Without thinking, Robert jogged after him. "Excuse me," he called. The man turned, his face hardening when he recognized who it was. "What now? The cops already got what you wanted." "That man who left through the side door," Robert said, catching his breath. "Was that Victor Manson? The owner?" The shopkeeper's eyes narrowed. "I don't owe you any answers. If the police want something, they know how to ask." "Just tell me if that was him," Robert insisted. With an exaggerated sigh, the shopkeeper finally muttered, "No, that was his brother. Now are you done? Go away and leave me alone." A bus pulled up, and the man climbed on board without another word, disappearing down the road as the doors shut behind him. Helen joined Robert a moment later. "What did he say?" "He claims it was Manson's brother," Robert replied, frowning. "But why wouldn't he mention that to the police? Why all the secrecy?" Helen hugged her arms tighter around herself. "I don't know, but it's getting late. We're both exhausted. Let's call the detective in the morning." Robert stood there for a moment, visibly torn. Part of him wanted to chase down every lead tonight, but another part knew she was right. At last, he gave a reluctant nod, one final glance toward Timber Treasures, its windows now dark, and he turned to follow her. Tomorrow, he told himself. Tomorrow we get answers. Their Airbnb was a cozy second-floor apartment tucked inside a renovated Victorian house just a few blocks from the market. The pale blue paint, the white trim. It had looked charming in the listing, and Helen had picked it for that comforting, old-fashioned feel. As they approached, Helen touched his arm. "I'm going to grab something from that Chinese place on the corner," she said softly. "I need something warm after today." Robert handed her the apartment key. "I'll wait here. Just need a smoke and a little quiet." After she disappeared down the block, Robert settled on the front steps. He lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and let the smoke drift upward into the night air. The familiar ritual slowed his heart, gave his mind space to process. Emily's rollerblades. After all these years, they weren't just a forgotten toy. They were proof. They were hers. But how had they ended up here? In a junk shop in Oregon, Robert stared at the smoke curling above his fingers. If the rollerblades made it here, could Emily have too? The thought lifted something inside him, but also rattled it, because now, for the first time in years, there was a sliver of hope. And that was almost more terrifying than the emptiness had been. He pulled out his phone and searched for Victor Manson, hoping for a clue, a photo, a background, anything. But there wasn't much. A bare-bones business listing, a couple of reviews about the store's random inventory, nothing personal, nothing useful. Then, just across the street, something moved. Robert paused. A small figure, half hidden behind a lamppost, was watching the building. He squinted through the gathering dark. In the deepening dusk, Robert squinted again. The figure behind the lamppost stepped into view. It was a child. A girl, maybe 10 or 11, thin and pale, with tangled blonde hair tied back in a messy ponytail. Her clothes hung loosely on her small frame. Robert stubbed out his cigarette and stood. "Hey there," he called softly, careful not to startle her. "Are you okay?" She hesitated, frozen for a moment. Then she took a timid step toward him. "Are you looking for someone?" he asked, walking a few steps closer, crouching to her level. The girl's eyes were wide, serious. "Please, sir," she said quietly, "can you help me save my sister?" Robert straightened slightly, a cold prickle crawling up his spine. "A bad man took her," she added, her voice barely above a whisper. His eyes darted around the street. Empty. Quiet. No one nearby. No waiting cars. No obvious threats. Still, something about this felt off. Or maybe it felt too familiar. "What's your name?" he asked calmly. "Carla." "Did someone send you here, Carla?" She shook her head. "No, I ran away. From the orphanage. I saw my sister today, but I was too scared to help her alone, so I followed them." Robert's thoughts whirled. An orphaned girl, a missing sibling, fear and confusion. It echoed too closely to his own loss. "Where did you see your sister?" he asked. "In the market," she said, "with a man in a cowboy hat. She's scared of him, but she's pretending she's not." Robert's breath hitched. He pictured the little girl with the pigtails outside the toy shop. The flinch when the man tousled her hair. He steadied his voice. "This man in the hat. Is he tall? Thinning hair? Leather jacket?" Carla nodded immediately. "That's him. He told everyone he adopted Jasmine, but he didn't. He's not good. He's lying." Robert's heart pounded. The parallels to Emily were impossible to ignore. And now this child stood in front of him, asking for help no one else had offered. "Do you know where they took her?" Carla nodded. "I followed them. I know the place, but I can't go in alone." Robert hesitated. Everything in his rational mind told him to call the police, report this, wait for protocol. But after 20 years of watching systems fail, 20 years of cold leads and closed doors, he couldn't walk away from this. "All right," he said quietly. "Let me get the car." He sent a quick message to Helen. "Taking the car for a bit. Something came up. Use your key. I'll be back soon." As they climbed into his rental and drove off, Robert couldn't help but wonder if he was making a terrible decision. But one thing he knew with absolute certainty: if this were Emily, he'd want someone to listen. The roads twisted through Fern Creek's sleepy neighborhoods. Streetlights grew sparser. Houses sat farther apart. Right there, Carla pointed. Tucked behind a clump of trees was a quiet, worn camper park, the kind of place that never made it onto maps. Robert pulled to the edge and killed the engine. In the distance, several campers formed a loose semicircle. One at the far end glowed faintly from inside. "That's it," Carla whispered. He looked at her, serious. "Are you absolutely sure your sister is in there?" She nodded slowly. "Please, we have to help her." He took a breath and got out. "Stay close, and if anything seems wrong, We leave. No arguments. Together they moved across the gravel lot. The air was silent. No movement inside the camper. Robert raised his hand and knocked. Nothing. He knocked again, louder. A moment later, the door opened. It wasn't the man with the hat. It was the other one. The one Robert had seen by the car outside the toy shop. The man's eyes flicked from Carla to Robert, narrowing quickly. "What do you want?" he asked flatly. "My name's Robert," he said calmly. "This girl says her sister is here. She asked me for help." The man stiffened. "I'm Mike, and you've got it all wrong. No one's being held here. Jasmine was adopted, legally. I'm just helping out." He looked at Carla sharply. "She's been causing trouble ever since, making up stories." "That's not true," Carla shouted, stepping forward. "You took her, you and that other man." Robert turned to Mike. "Who is the other man?" "My boss's brother," Mike answered, exasperated. "Look, my employer adopted Jasmine from St. Catharines. Everything was done legally. His brother came with me to pick her up while he's out of town." Robert's jaw tightened. The story was too neat, too rehearsed, and yet not easily disproven on the spot. But then, why had the girl flinched? Why was she terrified? The man's explanation sounded reasonable, on paper. But Robert couldn't shake the weight behind Carla's words. There was something raw and unfiltered in her voice, the kind of truth kids don't know how to fake. "Look," Robert said, doing his best to keep things calm. "Maybe there's a way to sort this out. Could I talk to your boss? Or maybe just let the girls speak for a minute. Let them say goodbye. It might help bring some closure." Mike's face darkened. "Not possible," he said flatly. "She's already gone, taken to her new home, in another vehicle." Just then, a faint sound reached Robert's ears, a muffled shh, followed by what might have been a child's voice. Mike quickly glanced over his shoulder, then snapped back. "That's just my kid," he said, brushing it off. "Now I suggest you get that girl back to St. Catharines before someone starts asking why a stranger took her across town without permission." "I was only trying to help." "Help?" Mike scoffed. "You call taking a kid off the street help? Return her, or next time it's me calling the cops." With that, he slammed the door. Robert stood there, stunned. The man's story had structure, logic, but something about it didn't sit right. "He's lying," Carla insisted as they walked back to the car. "Jasmine's in there. I saw her." Robert looked at her gently. "I know you believe that, but if Jasmine's been adopted—" "No!" she shouted, stomping her foot. "He's lying." "Please, you have to believe me." He sighed. Logic said, "Return Carla. Do the proper thing." But the pit in his stomach said otherwise. "Let's get in the car," he murmured. "We'll figure this out." Back inside, Carla sat silent, her small frame slumped in the seat, arms folded tight. Robert started the engine, then stopped again. His hands rested on the wheel. "Carla," he said gently, "I know you want to help your sister, but I can't keep you out here all night. I could get in real trouble for this." Tears welled in her eyes. "Please don't take me back. Not without Jasmine. I promise to protect her." Robert's heart twisted. He'd once made that same promise to Emily, that he'd always keep her safe, and he hadn't. "How about this?" he offered, searching for a middle ground. "We get some dinner first, something warm. Then we talk." She didn't reply, just wiped her cheeks with her sleeve, eyes glued to the dashboard. Then, headlights. Harsh, bright beams flooded the trees as the camper van suddenly roared to life and began backing out. "They're leaving," Robert said, his voice sharp with urgency. He turned to watch it pass, and for a brief second through the window, he saw her, a woman, auburn hair, standing by the curtains. She looked directly at him before pulling them closed. His breath caught. Emily. The name escaped as a whisper. It couldn't be. And yet, the face, the eyes, that unmistakable shape. It looked just like her, older, but exactly how he'd imagined her from those age progression renderings he'd studied for years. Without hesitation, Robert started the car and eased onto the road, keeping a safe distance behind the camper. "What are you doing?" Carla asked, sitting up straighter. "I saw someone," Robert said, trying to steady his breath. "A woman. I think she might be my daughter." "Your daughter?" He nodded, eyes locked on the red taillights ahead. "Emily. She was 12 when she disappeared, just like your sister. 1 minute she was safe, and then she was gone." As they followed the camper through winding roads, Robert's phone began to ring. Helen. He tapped the speaker. "Robert, where are you?" Her voice was tight with concern. "You've been gone for hours." "You're not going to believe this," he said, words tumbling out. "I think I saw Emily, a woman in the camper. She looked just like her." "What?" "Robert, where exactly are you?" "I'm not sure yet," he admitted. "We're following the camper. Helen, you remember how we used to say Emily had one of those faces? The kind that didn't change much?" He paused. "This woman. It was like looking at an older version of her. I felt it." "Please be careful," Helen said urgently. "You don't know who they are, or what they're involved in." "I know," he said, "but I have to follow this. I need to know." And just like that, the call cut out. Reception vanished as the road dipped deeper into the rural edge of Fern Creek. They drove in silence for nearly an hour. Carla occasionally pointed out turns to keep them on track. Then the van made a sharp turn onto a gravel driveway, leading up to a large house tucked behind a wooded rise. It wasn't enormous, but it was clearly secluded. 2 stories, quiet, hidden. Robert pulled off the road and parked just beyond view. He shut off the headlights. Inside the car, everything was still. He wasn't sure what came next, but if the woman in that house was who he thought she was, then everything was about to change. The house was large, farmhouse style, with a wraparound porch and a detached garage. Robert eased the car onto the shoulder about 100 yards from the entrance, headlights off. Trees partially concealed their position, giving him a clear but hidden view of the property. "What are we doing here?" Carla whispered, her voice tinged with unease. Robert looked over, suddenly aware of how unsettling this must be for a child. "I'm sorry, Carla. I should have taken you back, but you're not the only one who lost someone." He paused. "My daughter Emily vanished 20 years ago, and I think I just saw her in that camper. That's why I followed them." Carla's eyes widened. "You think the bad men took your daughter too?" "I don't know," Robert said, "but I'm not leaving without answers." His eyes locked onto the house as the camper rolled to a stop in front of the porch. Mike stepped out first. Then came the woman, and with her, the girl from the toy shop, Jasmine. "That's her," Carla whispered. "That's my sister." Robert felt his heart twist. The woman guiding Jasmine up the porch steps had auburn hair, tall and graceful, just like Helen, just like Emily. Her movements, her posture, everything about her stirred a memory too deep to ignore. And then, the man in the cowboy hat stepped out. Only now, he wasn't wearing the hat. Under the glow of the porch light, Robert saw his face clearly, the same face from the DMV photo Detective Marshall had shown them. It was Victor Manson. "He lied," Robert muttered. "Mike said he was out of town, but he's been with them the whole time. And the girl, she was in the camper." The realization hit hard. If Manson had lied about this, what else was he covering up? And if that woman really was Emily, what had she been through all these years? Robert's instinct screamed at him to storm the porch, demand the truth. But he was outnumbered, potentially outarmed, and he had a child with him. This called for caution. He reached for his phone. No signal. He was on his own. As he debated his next move, a sudden knock on the driver's side window made him jump. Mike's face appeared in the glass, hard and angry. "Stay in the car," Robert said quickly to Carla. "Lock the doors." He rolled the window down just enough to speak. "Mike, I was just about to head out." "Yeah, right," Mike snapped. "You followed us all the way out here. What are you, some kind of stalker?" Robert scrambled for an excuse. "The girl wanted to see her sister. I thought maybe we could talk, work something out." Mike wasn't buying it. "You're trespassing, and I don't know who you think you are, but you crossed a line. You and the kid, you're both coming with me." "I don't think that's a good idea," Robert said, his hand drifting toward the ignition. "It's not a request," Mike growled. He tapped something under his jacket, the firm outline unmistakable. Robert's pulse spiked, but he stayed composed. "Okay," he said slowly, pushing the door open. "Let's not turn this into something it doesn't need to be." Carla climbed out hesitantly. Robert gave her a reassuring glance, then followed Mike toward the house. He scanned everything, the vehicles, the layout, the exits. Every detail might matter. "You're making a mistake," Mike said darkly. "The boss isn't going to like this." "I just want answers," Robert said, gently guiding Carla along. "That's all." As they reached the porch, the front door opened, and Victor Manson stepped out, his face hard as stone. "Who are they?" he barked. "He was watching the house," Mike said. "Brought the girl, Carla, the sister." Manson's eyes locked onto Robert. "And who exactly are you?" "Robert Whitmore," he said, standing tall. "And I believe you have someone important, who belongs to me." Before Manson could respond, the woman Robert had seen earlier stepped into the doorway behind him. She froze. Her eyes met his, and something shifted in her face. Recognition, shock, fear, and something deeper, something hopeful. Then, in the distance, sirens. Mike swore under his breath and pulled out a small radio. "Boss, we've got company. Sounds like cops." Manson's expression twisted into a snarl. "How did they find us?" He turned on Robert. "Did you lead them here?" Robert shook his head. "My wife must have called when I didn't come back. She knew I was following your van." The woman, the one who might be Emily, still stood in the doorway, unmoving. Her face told a story Robert wasn't ready to hear. "Lena, get inside," Manson barked. But she didn't move. Not yet. But the woman, Lena, didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on Robert's, and something flickered in them. A quiet recognition, a memory trying to surface. "Emily," Robert whispered, his voice cracking. "Emily Grace." The sound of her full name seemed to ripple through her. Her posture shifted, her lips parted, and for a brief second, it was like time stopped. Outside, the police sirens were growing louder. The red and blue glow crept across the walls, and in that moment, Manson's anger turned cold. "Mike, get everyone inside," he barked. "Bring them too." Robert and Carla were ushered into the house. As they stepped through the doorway, Robert spotted Jasmine on the living room sofa. She looked terrified. Carla lunged toward her, but Mike held her back. Through the window, flashing lights now filled the night. The house was completely surrounded. "What's the plan here?" Mike asked, panic rising. Manson vanished into a side room and returned with a handgun. "Tell them we're armed and ready," he said without flinching. Robert's stomach turned. This was spiraling fast. Lena, Emily, stood frozen by the fireplace, pale and silent. From outside, a voice rang out over a loudspeaker. "This is Detective Marshall with Fern Creek Police. The house is surrounded. Come out peacefully and no one will be harmed." "No one moves," Manson growled, stepping to the front window. "Mike, bring the girl." Mike yanked Jasmine up by the arm. She cried out and Carla screamed, trying again to reach her sister. Robert pulled her back gently, shielding her with his body. "Let her go," Robert said, his voice even. "She's just a child. This doesn't need to involve her." Manson laughed bitterly. "You have no idea what you're mixed up in, Whitmore. You should have walked away back at the park." Then came another order. "Lena, come here. Tell them everything's fine. Tell them you're here willingly, that Jasmine was adopted legally." Emily didn't move. "I said now," Manson snapped. Slowly, she stepped forward, but stopped halfway across the room. "I can't do this anymore," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "What did you say?" Manson growled, his hand tightening on the gun. "I said I can't do this anymore." Her voice was louder now, clearer. She turned toward Robert. You're really my father, aren't you?" Tears welled in Robert's eyes. "Yes, Emily, we never stopped looking for you. Never!" "Lena, I'm warning you," Manson said, stepping forward, rage boiling. "No, Victor," she said, standing firm. "It's over." In an instant, Manson raised the gun, aiming straight at Robert. "You did this!" he yelled. "You turned her against me." What happened next unfolded in a blur. Emily lunged toward him. A struggle. A shot rang out. Then another. Robert flinched, certain the worst had happened. But when the smoke cleared, Manson was on the ground, blood blooming across his chest. Emily stood over him, breathing hard, a smaller handgun in her trembling hand. Her own arm was bleeding, a graze. Robert didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and kicked both weapons away just as Mike started to move. But it was too late. The front door burst open. "Police! Hands where we can see them!" Robert dropped to his knees, pulling Carla down beside him. Mike was tackled and cuffed. Medics poured into the room. One team heading to Manson, who was still alive, another to Emily. Robert watched from a few feet away, hardly able to breathe. 20 years, and she was standing right there. Later, at the hospital, the hallway outside the treatment room was buzzing with activity. Nurses moved briskly. Machines beeped behind closed doors. Robert sat in a plastic chair, numb, waiting. Detective Marshall approached, his tone calm but serious. "Mr. Whitmore, your daughter's going to be fine. The bullet only grazed her arm. No surgery needed." "And Manson?" Robert asked. "He's in surgery now. The wound's serious, but they think he'll survive." "And the girls?" "They're with Child Protective Services. Physically okay, but obviously shaken." Robert rubbed his face, exhaustion crashing into him. Helen had arrived at the hospital earlier, panicked, after calling the police when Robert stopped responding. The authorities tracked the rental car through GPS and found the farmhouse in time. She was downstairs now, getting them both coffee. A doctor appeared. "Mr. Whitmore, you can see your daughter now. She's resting comfortably." His heart pounded as he stepped into the room. Emily lay quietly on the hospital bed, arm bandaged, face pale. But her green eyes, Helen's eyes, were bright and alert. As he stepped closer, she looked up, searching his face. "Emily," he whispered, unsure how close to get. "It's really you." "Dad," she said, her voice cracking. That single word shattered him. Tears spilled down his cheeks as he took her hand. "I never stopped," he said. "Not for one single day." Her own eyes filled. "He told me you were gone, that you and Mom were in a car crash, that no one ever came looking." The door opened again. Helen stood there, breath caught, coffee cups forgotten in her hands. "Emily," she whispered. "Mom," Emily replied, suddenly sounding like a child again. Helen rushed to the bed, gently hugging her daughter, careful of the bandages. The three of them held each other, 20 years of silence collapsing into tears and trembling hands. Eventually, Detective Marshall entered quietly. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I need a statement. Miss Whitmore." or do you prefer another name? Emily sat up slightly. My name, she said clearly, is Emily Grace Whitmore. He called me Lena, but that was never really me. And then, for the next hour, she told them everything. Her voice was steady, but the truth was anything but. Emily began to speak, her voice steady but laced with pain. She described how Victor Manson, working as a long-haul trucker at the time, had approached her while she was rollerblading to a friend's house. He told me there had been a robbery nearby, that it wasn't safe to be alone, she said quietly. When I didn't believe him and tried to leave, he grabbed me. He put something over my face, a cloth with chemicals. I woke up hours later in his truck, hundreds of miles from home. She recounted how Manson kept her hidden, constantly on the move, avoiding major highways and checkpoints. Sometimes he'd hide me in a false compartment inside his truck, she added. We never stayed in one place very long, except Fern Creek. That was the only place we returned to, about once a month. Because of Timber Treasures? Detective Marshall asked, jotting notes. Emily nodded. That pawn shop was like his base. He has other identities, other businesses, some in other towns. He deals in stolen property, and other things. Helen, sitting beside her daughter, asked softly, Why didn't you try to run, especially when you got older? Emily lowered her eyes. I did, at first, but every time he caught me, it got worse. And he told me you were gone, that no one had ever come looking, that you'd both died in a car crash. Eventually, I stopped trying. It was just easier to survive. Detective Marshall leaned forward. When did he start calling you his wife? When I turned 18, Emily said, her voice flat. That's when he started introducing me to people, his contacts, his crew. He called me Lena, his quiet, obedient wife. But most of the time, I was still kept out of sight. Marshall's jaw tightened as he wrote. And Jasmine? He asked. Do you know how he got custody of her? Was it a legal adoption? Emily's face clouded. She clenched the bedsheet with her good hand. I don't know the full story, she said. But a few months ago, I overheard Victor talking to Mike. He said I was getting too old. She paused, trying to steady her breath. He said he wanted a new girl. He told Mike he was looking for a second wife. He still planned to keep me, but he wanted someone younger. He used the words, fresh bud. The room fell silent, the horror of the words settling like dust. Helen covered her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. They found Jasmine shortly after that, Emily continued. I don't know how he arranged it, but it wasn't legal. Victor rarely did things by the book. He's paranoid, always changing names, papers, locations. Detective Marshall straightened. We'll be launching a full investigation into the orphanage and Timber Treasures. If there was any corruption, if anyone helped him, we'll find it. Robert's voice was low, controlled, but burning with emotion. What's going to happen to him? He's facing a long list of charges already, Marshall said. Abduction, illegal confinement, endangerment of a minor, weapons violations, attempted homicide, and that's just the start. Once we dig into his network, there will be more. Robert nodded. The man who stole his daughter's life wouldn't disappear quietly into the shadows. Just then, a soft knock at the door. A nurse stepped in, followed by a woman in a CPS uniform, and behind her, Carla and Jasmine. The girls have been asking to see you, the CPS worker explained. Carla rushed over to Emily's bedside. Are you okay? She asked, eyes wide. Did the bad man hurt you real bad? Emily gave a gentle smile. Just a scratch. I'll be fine. How are you and Jasmine? Jasmine peeked out from behind her sister, her voice barely a whisper. Are we going back to the orphanage? Before the CPS worker could answer, Robert spoke. Actually, I'd like to talk about that. He turned to the caseworker. "We may not be able to adopt them today. We live out of state, and there's paperwork, but I want to help. I'd like to make sure they're placed somewhere safe and stable, and I'll personally support their care and education. Whatever they need." Emily reached over and gently took Carla's hand. "You saved me," she said, her voice full of warmth. "If you hadn't been brave enough to ask for help, I might never have found my way back." Carla beamed. "You saved my sister too." The CPS worker nodded. "We'll talk more about options, and your support is greatly appreciated." As the evening wore on, the hospital room was alive with motion. Doctors checked on Emily. Officers came by with updates. Helen made phone calls back home, sharing the news that no one could have dreamed of. Their daughter, missing for 2 decades, had been found. Victor Manson had survived surgery but remained in critical condition. Mike and 3 others from his inner circle had been arrested and were cooperating, already revealing pieces of a much larger network that stretched across state lines. When the room finally quieted, Robert sat by Emily's side, watching her sleep. Her face, so familiar yet changed by time, was finally at peace. Helen sat across from him, her hand resting lightly on their daughter's uninjured arm. 20 years, she whispered. "I never thought we'd see this day." "Thank you for making me go on this trip," Robert replied, voice thick with emotion. Of all the years of searching, of false leads and fading hope, it was a pair of rollerblades in a dusty shop window that led them back to her. That, and the courage of a little girl who refused to give up on her sister. Yes, they had lost so much. Birthdays, holidays, ordinary days that would never come back. But now, finally, they had the one thing that mattered most. They had each other. The darkness that had shadowed their lives for 2 decades was beginning to lift. Ahead of them lay healing, adjustment, and the slow process of becoming a family again. But they would walk that road together. Outside, the sky had turned deep blue. The stars began to shine. Robert remembered how Emily had loved stargazing as a child, always making a wish on the first star she saw. Tonight, for the first time in 20 years, he didn't need to make a wish. The miracle was already here. She was home.